Hey, my name is Todd Roberts, and I'm here to talk about Chapter 19, Broadband and Home Networks. I know that may not sound like the most exciting topic of all the chapters we've covered so far, and it certainly wasn't my first option, but it's been a good journey for me to take a dive into this. There's some interesting information here and a couple of topics that I hope you will give some thought to that affect how we consume the internet in our homes today. So let's start with a little bit of fun. So the internet is just over 20 years old, and it's really changed how we live our lives. I mean, I can't even imagine. It's hard to remember the life before the internet if you're my age. If you're in your 20s, you probably don't remember life at all before the internet. So let's look at some really crazy stats about how the internet has grown and how the adoption worldwide has taken place. So this is world internet usage and population statistics. And you can see here that if you look at the bottom row there, world total, the fourth column from the left, 51.7%. So 51.7% of the world, as of June of this year, now has access and is using the internet. Now, these numbers vary wildly between continents, as you would expect. But the growth in the continents that are lagging behind is, for example, Africa, where they currently only have 31% penetration. They've actually realized 8,500% growth in the last 17 years. So they're actually beginning to close the gap. Now, looking more closely at where I believe most of us live in North America, you can see that we're getting really close to 90% penetration there in the fourth column. And even with that 90% penetration, in the last 17 years, we've grown 200% almost in internet usage. So that's a lot of internet usage, a lot of data, and the changes in our home network, the changes in the devices that we use at home really are driving that adoption even further. So let's go a little bit further. So not only has how we use the internet changed our lives, it's changed the places where we live. It's actually had a physical impact on the homes that we live in and what we do in our homes. Our homes are now technology hubs that nobody back in the early computing days could have ever imagined. Our homes are probably full of more technology now than most office buildings were just maybe 25 years ago. So before we look deeply at broadband and home networks, let's kind of put all this into perspective and how fast this has happened. Here's a few things that are younger than the World Wide Web. The movie Titanic is younger than the World Wide Web. Harry Potter, the book, the first Harry Potter book, also younger than the World Wide Web. The movie Men in Black, one of my favorites, younger. We've had professional sports programs that didn't exist when the World Wide Web was launched, one of them being the Washington Nationals. Everybody's favorite, the TSA, did not exist when the World Wide Web was launched. And we've had several countries, including the country of South Sudan, that didn't exist when we saw the beginning of the World Wide Web. So yeah, no, most of us, especially me, feeling very old when you see that kind of data. And so I think we'll go ahead and stop talking about how old we are and move on. But before we do that, let's talk about The Wizard of Oz. In 1939, obviously is older than all of us and the World Wide Web. But when we start looking at all this data, we have to say to ourselves, lions and tigers and data, oh my. I mean, we're not in Kansas anymore when it comes to how we transmit and consume data. Things have changed so much that what we remember and really honestly, the changes that we'll see in the next 20 years probably will be even greater. So how is it that we're able to consume this much data so easily from our homes? Well, how much data are we talking about? At the beginning of this decade, and this comes from our text, there was 1 zettabyte of digital information in the world, a zettabyte. Much of that data flies around the globe and into our homes via our connections, and the numbers are getting bigger. According to this stat, every day we create 2.5 quintillion bytes of data, and 90% of all the data that we have today has been created in the last 2 years alone, and I got to believe a lot of that is due to video content. Video content is obviously heavy content in terms of data, and so much video is being created. The stats around YouTube uploads and things like that, the number of videos being created just by teenagers with Instagram in their smartphones is just skyrocketing. So not only are we creating more data, there's more people creating data. The bottom stat there, 3.5 billion people are now using the internet, consuming and creating data. So all this data requires high-speed networks. If we didn't have high-speed networks, if we all still lived in the days of dial-up, none of this would work. So let's take a look at the broadband network types that our text reviewed. First, we have DSL. I think most of us are probably very familiar with DSL. It stands for Digital Subscriber Line. Basically, it pushes your data through a standard telephone line. There's a version of DSL, which is very common, ADSL, that's called asymmetrical DSL, and it's widely used. But one of the issues with DSL that you have is the further you are from the distribution point or the central office, the slower the connection will be. So if you live really close to your DSL provider, you're going to have great speeds. If you're at the outer range of what they can push the data on, you're going to have very slow speeds. And typically the maximum for most ADSL subscriptions is about 3 megabytes per second download. There's also called fiber to node. I didn't recognize the acronym FTTN, but I have heard of fiber. Fiber to node is actually rapidly growing as we move more and more, create more and more fiber optic cable around the country. And you hear about cities like Atlanta, which is where I live, that now have certain neighborhoods that are connected to high-speed fiber. This is going to be a rapidly growing broadband network type and probably overtake DSL eventually. Right now, you can see there the speed peaks at about 100 megabytes per second with fiber to node. That's incredibly fast speed, and I'd love to have it here at the house. Another very common broadband network type is cable modem. Basically, the internet comes into your house in the very same cable as your television service. Not particularly fast though, peaking out at about 10 megabytes per second. So if you look at the fixed, the wired broadband subscriptions today, so all those that arrive via a wire, DSL is the most widely used. It was one of the earliest widely adopted models, and it's still very serviceable today. But as I said before, as the fiber continues to be laid around our country, more and more people are going to jump on the fiber network, and I do believe eventually it will surpass DSL and cable modems as the #1 provider of broadband networks. So there are other broadband networks you can get that aren't cable-based, that don't require an actual line coming into your house. One of them is satellite, and basically people who live too remotely for it to be cost efficient for a provider to run internet to your home, they're going to push you to satellite. That's really the only way that you're going to get cost efficient, and even that's expensive, but it's the only way you're going to get internet broadband network to your house. And really, it's not even that fast, 10 megabytes a second for downloads. So then that's really the high end. Most of your satellite users are going to find it's a little bit slower than that even. And then we have wireless networks. So obviously wireless networks require a wire at some point, but then within the network, devices can be connected to that network wirelessly without having to be using any cables at all. So there's two types of wireless networks. There's mobile, which we all are very familiar with who have cell phones. This is what our cell phones use all across the country, all around the world, wireless networks. And they're classified in 3G, 4G, and this mythical 5G that we keep hearing about that everybody believed we were going to see here in 2017, but hasn't materialized quite yet. And one thing I didn't know until reading this text was I thought that the G simply stood for something more technical and more futuristic than just generation, but it simply stands for generation. So 3rd generation wireless network, 4th generation, 5th generation, and that's what it stands for. And that's one of the reasons that 5th generation hasn't happened yet, because there's really not a lot of consensus on how to define what a 5G connection is. 3G is easily defined. 4G was a little bit tougher. With 4G, you often see LTE, and that was kind of the standard for saying that you had a 4G connection, but with 5G, there's not really any consensus around how fast and how much data can move over a 5G connection. So nobody's been able to claim that they have a 5G connection at this point. Also in the wireless world, there's fixed networks that use either Wi-Fi or WiMAX. Wi-Fi is obviously very common. Everybody knows Wi-Fi. We've got it all over our homes and all of our favorite coffee bars and in restaurants and even in our vehicles today with Wi-Fi service coming from satellites and using Bluetooth. But the other form is called WiMAX. And WiMAX, while not exceptionally widespread, does have incredible range, where Wi-Fi can get you maybe 100 to 300 feet at the very upper end. WiMAX actually has a range of up to 30 miles, which is very exceptional. But once again, it is not common. And according to the text, some companies have even started to back out of that technology. Another broadband network type that is also, it's even more declined than WiMAX would be broadband over power line. Basically, the power lines that come into your home and the power lines that run throughout your home would be used to deliver your broadband signal. This is nearly obsolete. There might be limited applications, but the reliability of this type of communication and the interference issues that it had with radio frequencies caused it to really be not a first choice and not cost efficient, and contributed to the demise of BPL. So you're not going to see a lot, if any, BPL networks out there today. So let's just recap that for a moment. We had these different types of broadband networks, and I just kind of want to recap them and give you one final look at what they mean. So DSL, digital subscriber line, is the #1 most used network today. FTTN, or fiber to node, I think it's also referred to in some places as very fast DSL, so VDSL. But it is very fast and growing. Once again, I believe it will be the largest network backbone in the country someday. Cable modem, a lot of us use cable modems still today, where your television and internet are all in one line. Satellite, for those, once again, whose neighbors are 50 miles away. So if you don't live anywhere close to anybody else, you're probably going to have to use satellite to get your internet. There's Wi-Fi and WiMAX underneath the wireless category. Once again, big difference there between 300 feet of range or 30 miles. And then lastly, as we just talked about, BPL, broadband over power lines, which is basically obsolete today. So that's the different broadband network types that our tech covers. So here's my first question. And I'm going to have a few questions, but a couple of them are very easy. What type of broadband service do you have in your home? So I'd love to hear back from everybody around, what do they use today? I'd love to know if anybody has satellite out there or if anybody has fiber. So if you're on one end or the other of the spectrum, I would guess that most of us probably have DSL or cable modems. So, all right, moving on. So let's talk about home networks. So we have this incredible ability now to get a lot of data, a lot of access to our places of residence, but that access still has to work inside our home. So how does it do that, and how much has that changed over the last couple of years? Not long ago, probably I would say 25 years ago, you couldn't find a network outside of a high-end office building, maybe a school or a government building. Networks in homes were really far-fetched and probably existed only in the very rare case. But as the technology became more efficient, as the broadband delivery options improved, as cost went down for devices like gateways and things like that, and as we became more multi-device oriented in our homes, it really pushed the envelope of how home networks are set up and what the capabilities are. Today, computers, tablets, printers, televisions, you name it, if you plug it in, there's a decent chance that it's going to be able to connect to a network. Now, not everything. As of right now, I don't believe that your hairdryer can log into Google, but a lot of things in your home, if they can be plugged in, they can be part of a network. So that leads me to my next two questions. How many connected devices do you have in your home? So take a moment and look around and just think about all the cell phones and tablets and televisions, and even if you have some of the more advanced devices like personal assistants, for example, Alexa, or if you have any security system maybe, or even some appliances now have connections to network. So I'd love to know how many connections you have in your home, how many devices are connected in your home, and then think about what is it you have or what is it that you'd like to have in your home that you'd have to have connected to a network. What is it? Is it an appliance? Is it something else that you have in your home that you'd love to have internet capabilities, whether it be for security purposes or just ease of use or whatever? Take a minute and think about what does that look like? What would that be one thing that you put on your wish list to have connected to a network? All right, let's keep rolling here. Home networks. Once again, we're talking about home networks, how they've changed, how they've grown. There's two primary types of home networks. There's wired and wireless. Wired use Ethernet cables. The oftentimes they're blue. Cat5 cables is what we call them. There's other variations of that. They use Ethernet cables, they use telephone lines, and they use power lines. Power lines very, very rarely, but there are some devices out there that may still do that. And these would be actually plugged into a port or an outlet in your house and then into the actual device. Wireless networks utilize Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and Zigbee, which are all different standards for pushing wireless signals. And most homes actually have a combination of these two networks. So most homes are going to have a few devices. You got to have at least one device that's plugged in. And we're going to talk about gateways in a little bit. But then you might have another few devices that are also plugged in. If you look at this example here that I've got below of a hybrid network, you can see where there's a computer and a gateway and a few other devices that are actually plugged in to a wired network. But then there's just as many or more other devices that are completely wire-free and just using the wireless signals, typically Wi-Fi, but sometimes Bluetooth or Zigbee. Zigbee, it'd be rare to find a Zigbee application inside your home, but definitely we have some Bluetooth devices now inside our home. So that's kind of how home networks look from a diagram perspective. There's almost always a combination of a hybrid of a wired and a wireless network. Here are some trends that are happening in the world of home networks. So a lot of new homes, a lot of new home builders today are actually building out much more sophisticated wiring around the home to allow for advanced usage of like home theaters and surround sound, room-to-room communication devices. I mean, I've been in a few homes of friends who they actually have these like little closets that have a hub for all the routers and devices that are using this network. So you got a communications closet now in your home. So that's definitely a trend I think is going to continue. We certainly love our internet access. We certainly love our movies and our sports and our music. So all these things that are going to require this kind of access, I think these new homes are going to see more and more of this structured wiring happen. There's also new standards that are being pushed for to bring all homes eventually up to a transfer speed of 1 gigabyte per second. As technology continues to evolve, and we talk about all the content that's being created and all the things that'll be using the internet line that's coming into our home, we're going to need faster transfer speeds in our homes. So the home builders and different government or agencies are pushing for higher standards of transfer speeds within the home. And I want to talk a moment just about the kind of the hero of the story, is what I call the residential gateway, because none of this happens. None of this happens in the home without the gateway. This device allows everybody in your home to use all kinds of different devices back to one point. This is the central hub. It's kind of a one-to-many model where the internet comes in here, and this wonderful device called a residential gateway kind of makes all the magic happen. And there's a couple of pictures there you can see of what a gateway might look like in your home. Some of them, the wireless access point is built right into the gateway. In other homes like mine, I've got wireless access points that are plugged into outlets around my house that are pulling wirelessly from the gateway. So this is a good topic. This is a great topic to think about, and this is going to be the topic of my final question to you. So we'll go through this a little bit more slowly, maybe. If you haven't heard of net neutrality, you probably should have, and if hopefully if you read the text, you got a good feel for it. But it's a big issue, and I think it's going to become even more of the public dialogue over the next few years. Right now, the Verizons and Comcasts of the world, the Charters, and anybody who's an internet service provider, they could, if they chose to, could block certain content from certain providers and or if not block it, they could also slow it down. So they could basically pick and choose whose content gets to your home faster. So if you think about this application in examples of like Netflix, for example, which a lot of people have Netflix, is hugely popular. If for some reason Comcast decided that they wanted to slow down the network, the Netflix bandwidth into your home, they could really impact your experience with Netflix. They have the ability to do that. Now, we're going to look at this a little bit further, but I wanted to play a video right here for you and let you kind of take a look at what net neutrality is and why it does matter to you. So take a moment here. It's not a long video. Let's go ahead and watch this, and then we'll come back after the video and keep moving on. All right, good video. Hopefully that was beneficial for you. It certainly helped me get a better understanding of what net neutrality was. So what is the definition of net neutrality? Basically, it's the idea or principle that an internet service provider has to treat everybody's data the same way. It's a digital fairness approach that says, the people who control the pipes, the people who control how the data gets to your home, can't treat somebody's data different than anybody else's. That it's everything's free and everything's equal as it gets pushed to your home. And personally, I think that's pretty important. I think that if we were to lose net neutrality, you'd see a lot of strange things, including pricing changes and limitations that would arise. And we're going to talk about those here in just a moment. But one of the issues with net neutrality is peering agreements. So you'd have, and this did happen already, as you'll see Comcast and Netflix there actually have did an agreement like this back in 2014. But what you'd find the bigger players, the ones who have deeper pockets, they could go to a Comcast and say, hey, I want my data to be priority. I want everything that I send to the consumers who subscribe to me to be top priority in your network, and I'm going to pay you this much to do that. And I think if you think about that, that's a pretty slippery slope. And I don't think we want to go down that slope into where service providers can kind of pick and choose, and whoever pays for potentially gets the best space. Now, the FCC did vote to implement net neutrality in 2015, meaning they voted in favor of the idea of open and free, nobody can control. But this made a lot of people in the industry who are against net neutrality very angry. So they've actually filed suits now against the FCC, saying they overstepped their bounds. So this is not done yet. We'll see how it plays out over the next few years. And then finally, and I agree with this, I think proponents of net neutrality see it as a free speech issue. Sorry. So that's really what it is to me as well. If you have the ability to create content, and I as a consumer choose to consume your content, I want that content to get to me just as equally and as quickly, without any barriers as other content of somebody who may have bigger pockets and can pay for preferential treatment. So one more topic, and then we're all done. Usage-based pricing, and this is indirectly related to net neutrality. It's very common in our cell phones today. So a lot of our cell phone plans, and I think it's a growing trend where you pay for so much data, and we see that with AT&T, Verizon, everybody. It's a micro environment where I'm going to use this much data, I'm going to pay for it. But what will happen is, and you can see this is an actual quote from our text, is that if net neutrality does fail, if net neutrality doesn't fail, I apologize. If net neutrality doesn't fail, there's a chance that these service providers are going to be looking to create a billing structure much more like our cell phones, where we would have to pay at the end of the month based on how much internet we used, or we could pay upfront for what we believe is how much we're going to use, how much data we're going to use, and then if for some reason in the month we've used too much, they could actually slow down our service and we wouldn't be able to stream any movies or have a fast internet experience or anything like that. So I'm very much, once again, against that. But I'd love to know, in my final question, how do you feel about net neutrality and usage-based pricing for your home network? So thanks for your time. Hopefully that was informative, and looking forward to your feedback.